There is a moment on the spiritual path that almost no one talks about. It's not the blissful meditation, it's not the sudden feeling of unity with the universe, and it's definitely not the glowing enlightenment that spiritual books love to promise. Instead, it's the moment when everything begins to fall apart. The beliefs that once gave you certainty start to crumble. Relationships shift. Your old goals feel strangely empty. You begin noticing patterns in society, in people, even in yourself, patterns that were invisible before. And with that awareness comes something unsettling, a deep, uncomfortable darkness. Many people believe spiritual awakening is a journey of constant peace and happiness, but ancient traditions knew better. The mystics, hermits, and philosophers who walked this path long before us warned that awakening is not a gentle sunrise. It is more like walking through a storm. And in that storm there are stages, dark, confusing, sometimes terrifying stages that almost everyone encounters, but very few are prepared for. You may feel isolated, as if the world no longer understands you. You may question everything you once believed about reality. You may even wonder if something is wrong with you. But what if these experiences are not signs that you are lost? What if they are signs that you are waking up? Throughout history, spiritual seekers, from desert mystics to ancient philosophers, have described a hidden process that unfolds when consciousness begins to expand. It's not just a transformation of beliefs, it's a dismantling of the ego, the identity, and the illusions that once defined your reality. And that process can be dark. In this video, we're going to explore the 7 dark stages of spiritual awakening that almost no one warns you about. These are the psychological and spiritual thresholds that appear when someone begins to see beyond the surface of reality. Some of these stages will feel disturbingly familiar. Others may challenge everything you thought awakening was supposed to be. But understanding them could change how you see your own journey forever. Because sometimes the deepest darkness is not a sign of failure, it's a doorway. The idea that spiritual awakening involves darkness is not new. In fact, the deepest spiritual traditions have always warned about it. Long before modern self-help books turned awakening into a glamorous concept, mystics described it as a process of dissolution, a breaking apart of the self that can feel deeply unsettling. One of the most famous descriptions comes from the 16th century Spanish mystic John of the Cross, who wrote about a mysterious stage called the Dark Night of the Soul. He described it as a period where the seeker feels abandoned, lost, and spiritually empty. To outsiders, it looks like despair, but to the mystic, it is transformation. According to his writings, the dark night appears when the illusions of the ego begin to dissolve. The person who once relied on identity, beliefs, achievements, and external validation suddenly finds those things losing their meaning. The soul, stripped of its attachments, enters a kind of spiritual wilderness. This concept also appears in Eastern traditions. In Buddhism, advanced meditation practitioners often encounter what is known as the knowledge of suffering during deep insight practices. At this stage, the practitioner begins to see the impermanence and instability of all experiences. Instead of peace, the immediate result can be anxiety, confusion, and a sense that reality itself is unstable. Similarly, in the philosophy of Carl Jung, awakening requires confronting what he called shadow psychology, the hidden parts of the psyche that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Jung famously wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." In other words, enlightenment is not about escaping darkness, it is about integrating it. Ancient Hermetic traditions carried similar ideas. The alchemists, for example, described spiritual transformation through symbolic stages. The first stage was called nigredo, often represented by blackness, decay, and chaos. To the alchemist, nigredo was the necessary destruction of the old self before the creation of something new. Nothing pure could emerge until everything false had been burned away. Even in ancient philosophical traditions like Stoicism, the pursuit of wisdom involved confronting uncomfortable truths about control, mortality, and human suffering. The path to clarity required letting go of comforting illusions. Across cultures, across centuries, the message is surprisingly consistent. Awakening begins not with illumination, but with disillusionment. The structures that once made reality feel stable, belief systems, identities, social roles, start to weaken, and when they collapse, the mind often enters a period of chaos. This is why many spiritual seekers become confused during awakening. They expect peace, but instead encounter uncertainty. They expect answers, but instead face deeper questions. What they do not realize is that they've stepped into a process that countless mystics have described before them, a process that moves through distinct psychological stages. Some of these stages feel like isolation, some feel like identity collapse, some feel like confronting parts of yourself you never wanted to see, and together they form the hidden map of transformation. In the next section, we'll begin exploring the first stages of this journey, the early shifts that signal the beginning of spiritual awakening, and why they can feel far darker than most people expect. Spiritual awakening rarely begins with light. More often, it begins with a crack in reality. At first, it is subtle. Something in your life stops making sense. The goals you once chased start to feel strangely hollow. Conversations that once entertained you now feel repetitive, almost mechanical. You begin to sense that there is a deeper layer to existence, but you cannot yet see it clearly. This is where the first dark stages begin. Every person lives inside a mental framework, a collection of beliefs about the world, society, identity, and purpose. These beliefs act like the walls of a house, giving structure and stability to our perception of reality. But awakening begins when those walls start to crack. Perhaps you notice contradictions in the systems around you, social norms, cultural expectations, even ideas about success and happiness. Things that once seemed obvious suddenly feel artificial. It can feel disorienting. Imagine waking up in a theater and realizing the entire play you believed in is scripted. The characters are still acting, the story is still unfolding, but now you see the stage lights and the hidden machinery behind the scenes. At this stage, many people feel confusion or quiet anxiety, not because they know the truth, but because they can sense that the old explanations are no longer enough. The mind begins searching, and that search leads to the next stage. Once you begin questioning the structure of reality, something strange often happens. The world around you starts to feel distant. Friends may still talk about the same things: status, competition, daily drama, but your interest in those conversations fades. You find yourself withdrawing, sometimes without understanding why. This stage can feel lonely. It's like standing on the shore while everyone else is swimming in the same familiar waters. You can see them clearly, but you no longer feel the desire to dive back in. Many spiritual seekers mistakenly believe something is wrong with them during this period. They wonder if they are becoming antisocial, detached, or emotionally numb. But what is really happening is subtler. Your awareness is changing faster than your environment. When your awareness expands, the old patterns of interaction may no longer resonate. The mind begins seeking deeper conversations, deeper meaning, deeper connection. But until those connections appear, the path can feel isolating. This is why so many mystics throughout history spent time alone, not because solitude was the goal, but because transformation temporarily separates you from the familiar world. And that separation leads directly into the next stage. Stage 3. The collapse of identity. One of the most destabilizing parts of awakening is the realization that the identity you have carried your entire life may not be as solid as it seemed. Most people define themselves through roles, career, family expectations, social identity, beliefs about personality and purpose. But awakening begins to dissolve these definitions. You start asking uncomfortable questions. Who am I without my achievements? Who am I without the expectations others placed on me? Who am I beyond the story I've been telling about myself? At first, this questioning feels liberating, but soon it can become deeply unsettling. Without the old labels, the mind experiences something it rarely encounters: psychological emptiness. It is similar to standing in an open field after leaving a crowded city. The silence feels vast, unfamiliar, almost overwhelming. This stage often brings confusion, emotional volatility, or the feeling of being in between identities. You are no longer the person you once were, but you have not yet discovered who you are becoming. In ancient traditions, this moment was considered the beginning of true transformation. The old self must dissolve before a deeper awareness can emerge. But dissolution is rarely comfortable, because what comes next is perhaps the most difficult stage of all, the moment when awakening forces you to confront the parts of yourself that have been hidden for years, the shadow. If the first stages of awakening crack the surface of reality, the next stages descend into its depths. This is the point where many seekers become frightened, not because awakening stops, but because it begins revealing things that were carefully hidden within the mind. Spiritual awakening is not just about discovering higher truths, it is also about confronting everything within you that is not aligned with them. Once the old identity begins dissolving, the mind loses its ability to hide certain truths from itself. Old emotions begin resurfacing. Memories you thought were resolved appear again. Patterns in your behavior become painfully clear. Jealousy, fear, anger, insecurity, feelings that were once buried under distraction now rise to the surface. This stage mirrors the psychological idea described by Carl Jung as the confrontation with the shadow. The shadow represents the parts of ourselves we prefer not to acknowledge. Perhaps the desire for control, the fear of rejection, the need for validation. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding these aspects of their personality, but awakening removes the veil that keeps them hidden, and that can be uncomfortable. Imagine turning on a light in a room that has been dark for years. The dust, the clutter, the neglected corners suddenly become visible. Nothing new has appeared, but now you can see what was always there. The same happens within the psyche. This stage is not meant to punish you, it is meant to integrate you. Because spiritual growth is not about pretending darkness does not exist, it is about understanding it, learning from it, and transforming it. But before that transformation happens, many seekers pass through another difficult stage. Stage 5. The void. After the identity dissolves and the shadow surfaces, a strange emptiness often follows. The ambitions that once motivated you lose their power. The beliefs that once structured your life feel incomplete. Even spiritual practices may temporarily feel meaningless. This is what many mystics described as the void. It is a psychological space where the old self is gone, but the new self has not yet formed. The mind no longer clings to familiar illusions, yet it has not fully adapted to deeper awareness. The result can feel like drifting in a vast ocean without a clear direction. This stage can produce feelings of detachment, existential questioning, or even temporary apathy toward things that once seemed important. But paradoxically, this emptiness is not a sign of failure. It is a clearing of space. Just as a forest must burn before new growth emerges, the mind must sometimes pass through a period of emptiness before it reorganizes itself around deeper truth. And eventually, that reorganization begins. As awareness deepens, many seekers begin noticing patterns in the world around them that were once invisible. Social systems, cultural narratives, the constant pursuit of status, approval, and material success. You begin to see how many people are following scripts they never consciously chose. At first, this realization can create frustration or sadness. It may feel as though the world is operating on autopilot, repeating cycles of competition, distraction, and illusion. This stage often leads people to temporarily withdraw from certain social environments, not out of arrogance, but because their perception has shifted. They are no longer able to fully participate in systems that feel disconnected from deeper truth. But this stage also carries a hidden lesson. Awakening is not about rejecting humanity. It is about understanding it with compassion. The final stage begins when the seeker realizes that awakening is not meant to separate them from the world, but to help them engage with it differently. Eventually, something profound happens. The confusion begins to settle. The void starts to transform into clarity. The shadow that once felt overwhelming becomes something you can observe rather than fear. You begin understanding that awakening is not a single moment, it is a continuous unfolding. Instead of trying to escape the darkness, you learn to move through it with awareness. Instead of clinging to identities, you allow yourself to evolve. Instead of fighting reality, you begin observing it with deeper understanding. And in that moment, the darkest stages reveal their true purpose. They were never obstacles, they were initiations. But understanding these stages intellectually is only the beginning. The real transformation happens when you learn how to navigate them consciously. Practical application: navigating the dark stages of awakening. Understanding the dark stages of awakening is powerful, but knowledge alone is not enough. Because when these stages appear in real life, they are rarely philosophical. They feel emotional, personal, sometimes overwhelming. The real question is not whether these stages will appear, but how you will move through them when they do. Here are several practical approaches that ancient traditions and modern psychology both suggest for navigating these transformations. 1. Learn to observe without immediately reacting. One of the most important skills during awakening is awareness without identification. When difficult emotions surface, fear, anger, loneliness, the instinct is to fight them or escape them. But spiritual traditions teach something counterintuitive. Observe first. Imagine your thoughts and emotions as clouds moving through the sky. The sky itself does not struggle with the clouds, it simply allows them to pass. Practices like meditation help develop this skill. Even 5 or 10 minutes of quiet observation each day can train the mind to step back from emotional turbulence. Over time, you begin to realize something profound. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that sees them. Write down what awakening reveals. During awakening, insights appear quickly, but they can also disappear quickly. Keeping a journal becomes extremely valuable during this process. Write down what you notice about your thoughts, emotions, relationships, and patterns. You may begin seeing connections that were invisible before. Certain fears may repeat themselves. Certain beliefs may quietly shape your decisions. By putting them on paper, you transform unconscious patterns into conscious understanding. This simple practice can make the journey far less confusing. 3. Limit the noise that distracts the mind. Modern life is filled with constant stimulation, news feeds, endless scrolling, notifications, and distractions, but awakening requires space for reflection. If the mind is constantly filled with external noise, it becomes difficult to hear the quieter signals of inner awareness. You don't need to completely disconnect from society, but intentionally creating small moments of silence, walking without headphones, sitting quietly, reducing unnecessary media consumption can dramatically deepen your clarity. Silence often reveals what noise hides. 4. Do not isolate yourself completely. During the stage of disillusionment, many people withdraw from the world entirely. While temporary solitude can be valuable, complete isolation can slow the integration process. Remember, awakening is not meant to separate you from humanity. It is meant to deepen your understanding of it. Seek meaningful conversations when possible. Connect with people who are curious, reflective, or open-minded. Even 1 or 2 genuine connections can anchor you during difficult stages. Awakening does not remove your humanity, it expands it. 5. Accept that confusion is part of the path. Perhaps the most important realization is this: confusion is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that your perception is expanding beyond old frameworks. Imagine a person leaving a small village for the first time and entering a vast city. At first, everything feels overwhelming. The streets are unfamiliar, the scale is larger, and the rules seem different. But gradually, the mind adapts. Awakening works the same way. The world has not necessarily changed, but your perception of it has. And perception takes time to reorganize. Patience is not just helpful during awakening, it is essential. If there is one truth that the spiritual path quietly hides, it is this: awakening is not simply about light, it is about seeing clearly. And clarity often arrives by passing through darkness first. Throughout this journey, we explored the 7 hidden stages that many people encounter when their awareness begins to expand. The fracture of certainty, the feeling of isolation, the collapse of identity, the confrontation with the shadow, the emptiness of the void, the disillusionment with society, and finally, the slow integration of a deeper awareness. Each of these stages can feel unsettling when experienced for the first time, but when seen from a wider perspective, they are not signs of spiritual failure. They are signs that something fundamental within you is transforming. Think of it like the process of forging a blade. Before metal becomes strong, it must pass through intense heat. It must be melted, reshaped, and hammered again and again. Only then does it become something refined and resilient. The same principle applies to consciousness. The illusions we once relied on must dissolve before deeper understanding can take their place. The parts of ourselves we once avoided must be faced before they can be integrated. This is why so many ancient mystics described awakening not as an escape from reality, but as an initiation into it, a gradual process of seeing the world and yourself with increasing honesty. If you recognize some of these stages in your own life, remember this: you are not alone and you are not lost. Many people throughout history have walked this same path. What feels like chaos in the moment often becomes clarity in hindsight. Sometimes the most confusing chapters of life are not detours at all, they are transitions. So instead of fearing the darkness that occasionally appears on the path, learn to observe it, understand it, and move through it with patience. Because the deeper truth of awakening is not that darkness disappears, it's that you learn how to see through it. And once that vision develops, the journey itself becomes the teacher. If this exploration resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on which stage you might be currently experiencing. Awareness is always the first step toward transformation, and the path of awakening is only just